Good afternoon. Welcome to this session. My name's Jeremy Kape. I'm Interim Director of Asset Strategy and Analysis at the Guinness Partnership, which is a social housing provider, and we own and manage sort of circa 64,000 homes across the UK. We've got a great lineup of speakers today about what I think is a really important and sometimes under-considered subject. So I was walking around today, you can't help be impressed by the level of innovation, the fantastic products and materials that are being developed all the time, the new approaches that are coming to the fore to really deal with this retrofit challenge. But unless we can convince pretty much every household in the UK this is a good thing to do, none of that stuff will have any bearing. And indeed, if we can't convince the households of the UK now and in the future to interact differently with their home and to live differently, then these things aren't going to bring forward the savings that we all, I think, need them or hope they will bring forward. So we have got three fantastic speakers today. I'm just going to introduce them all now, and then they're going to come up and do their presentations, and then we're going to do questions and answers, and hopefully we'll get some real engagement and ideas and stuff from you guys later on. So first of all, Paul Norman, who works for Clarion Housing Group, which is the UK's largest provider of social housing. Paul's going to share his experiences around work they've been doing with SHDF-funded retrofit projects and how now they've worked with customers on that. Then we've got Fiona Fylan from Beckett University, who's a psychologist and who's going to talk about behaviour and how we engage customers in behaviour and behaviour change. And then third up, we've got Kape Charrington from Projekt 3, Director of Projekt 3, who's going to talk about our surveys really doing enough in terms of engaging customers and how we build the retrofit agenda. So, first up, Paul.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right, let me just tee this up. Lovely stuff. So this is around our experience that we've had on SHDF Demonstrator and Wave 1, and particularly around the engagement with customers and what we've learned and how we think and how we've started to engage with customers differently going forwards into next year. So this all started around us looking at our customer journey sort of in an end-to-end process, and we kind of set out what our roadmap looked like on a number of stages. And it's about how we listen to customers and different things. And there's so many different ways we can communicate with customers now, but we've been so reliant on using a telephone and letters for so long, and that typical plan program approach. And it leaves so many things on the table. There's savings, there's the data, and there's trying to understand how we can continually get better. So all of the work we've done in the last 18 months has just led us to realise that we completely needed to change the way we needed to look at customer engagement delivering this type of work. And that led us to design this, which is essentially our customer engagement framework. And particularly the bit to talk about today is our pre-works engagement. You know, this is very much the before we get into doing anything. And I think the bit we've learned the most is how far ahead we need to start doing that with customers, particularly when we're doing this kind of complex and different type of work. So people are going to talk about nudge a lot more detailed than I, and are far more expert. But typically in planned programs, we'd be engaging with customers 2 to 3 months in advance when we're doing kitchens, bathrooms and boilers. And we've recognised that is simply not okay when we're doing works that essentially change people's lives. It changes the way they live in their homes when you do deep retrofit. So actually what we've learned is we need to start engaging with people up to 12 months in advance of doing those works. Now, the conversations I had with our delivery team about writing to customers 12 months before we turn up was a robust one, I think it's fair to say. But actually, we don't talk about works. So it was all about getting that customer on the journey of what we're trying to do and in the mindset for change. This is a change programme, it's not a delivery programme. And that is the approach we've probably learned, and our ethos has had to change to pick that up. So what we talk to them about is things like fuel poverty and giving them fuel advice. Then we start moving them on to, what is climate change, and actually a little bit around social responsibility, because one of the biggest challenges we have is actually getting in. You'd be amazed that we still have something like a 30 to 40% non-access rate, even now doing works that reduce people's energy bills when we are currently seeing energy bills go through the roof. And then you get to the actual energy saving interventions. This is the point where we've now got them just about to start talking around the works. And that's where this comes in. So 3 to 6 months before, we start that detailed communications package with the RLO, so the resident liaison officer. And I think, again, the experience we've gained is the role that person plays has fundamentally changed. It is not just about informing customers about what's going on. They have to take an active role in selling the opportunity of retrofit. It really is a selling job. But that has to be done transparently. We're not trying to sell them dodgy double glazing. This is all about taking them on the journey of what we're doing. So what we've been doing over the last 18 months is changing the way we look at, but developing some tools that actually help the people that go into our customers' homes to take them on that journey. Language has always been a barrier, and one of the things we're now piloting is a language barrier app that obviously both puts it in printed and also speaks the language we've got in front of people, converting it from English to their native tongue, which again, it's all about building trust with those people in those homes. And actually, it is about getting in, and by getting in and staying in and reducing those visits, there's an efficiency in that. So whilst this is all about building trust, there is a byproduct, and a really good byproduct. We can start to reduce the cost of delivering these works. The other thing that we've got is around, we all know the importance of peer reviews, customer champions. Now, half of our project is in a relatively estate-based area. The other half is a rural-based area where your neighbour can be 20 minutes away, so it's just impractical to create that kind of community. So we've actually just finished filming our customers who've had the work done, giving testimonials about what they've had, the experiences they've gone through, the good and the bad, because we want people to understand, you know, the intrusiveness of having this work done. And again, it's all about building that trust so that when we are in people's homes, that program flows all the way through. And the last one, and it's the little video that you've been seeing playing there, which has, you know, been the really exciting thing we've developed over the last 12 to 18 months, is we've recognised we need to visualise this process to customers. It's great sending them loads of literature, and it's born out of my own experience. I'm dyslexic, I can't read, so send me loads of paperwork, I can't read it, I won't understand it. But give me a picture, and I'm there. So this came out of that where, you know, we developed this 3D augmented reality app that an RLO can have in front of a customer, talking them through the process. They can pick the measures that we're going to put on, they can see what's going to happen. It just brings it to life about heat loss and what's going to happen in their property as we go through the works. And then we've got what's called the hero page at the end, which essentially talks through what works they're having done, their EPC, and more importantly, what that's going to save them as an individual. And that really starts to hammer home what it is we're trying to do. And with that, I'll hand over to Kate.
Okay, folks, my name is Fiona Fylan. I'm a health psychologist, and what that means is that I spend my time designing and evaluating interventions to change behaviour, which is kind of useful in this sort of setting. So there's lots of different behavioural theories that you can draw on when you're looking at engaging with consumers and changing their behaviour. So I guess my first message is don't start from scratch. Go and have a look at what's out there. There are many different theories that predict behaviour, several about how you can change behaviour, and 95 different behaviour change techniques that you can use when you're trying to plan your intervention. But from my quick 5-minute introductory slot, I just want to get you to ask yourselves 3 questions if you're trying to change your customers' behaviour. So, the first question is, first of all, how can you tell them about the benefits they're going to get from retrofit? So, benefits, we know, for instance, the pro-environmental message from our research, it's becoming more and more acceptable. So people now are recognising the need to make changes. Social norms, moral norms that we heard about before, they're really important, yeah? And in terms of the grand scheme of things, people accept that making changes to the energy efficiency of the home is actually quite an easy change for them to make. I also work for the NHS and looking at making the NHS net zero, and some of the changes we're going to have to ask people to make to their health and how they use the healthcare service are massive. So this is relatively simple. So tell them about the advantages, of course, environmental advantage, but of course the most important are financial advantages. What difference is it going to make to me in terms of how much I'm going to save? So that is what they want to know. But of course, how you tell them is really important as well. So people, first of all, want to hear from friends and family. Paul mentioned trust. Trust is absolutely essential. Who do they trust the most? Friends and family who've had this work done already. If not, trusted tradespeople, builders, plumbers, so on, that they've had and worked with before. And then after that, then they will go out to the industry. But essentially, they need to be able to trust. So it helps if you can demonstrate what you're suggesting to them. A model like this is fantastic. If they can have access to a real-life demonstrator, that's even better. But that's really good. Then also they want personalised projections of savings as well. So a house like yours, with an occupancy like yours, how much are you going to save? So people are prepared to spend money to save money. They want to know what their personal payback period is. So that's the first question. Second question is, how can you make it easy for people? The easiest way, of course, is to make it the default option. They've actually got to change something if they don't have what you recommend for them. But then what you need to do is to understand the customer. Insight research to understand what are their beliefs, what are their barriers to retrofit, and how can you help to overcome those barriers? Okay, and the third question to ask yourself is, how can you piggyback on other life changes that are happening? So for retrofit, the most obvious one is a house move. That is when people think about, what is this new house that I'm moving into? What changes could I make, do I need to make at this particular point? It's just about the only point that people think about changing their heating systems, for instance, other than when their boiler breaks. So house moves, building works that have been done, home improvements, that's a really good point as well. But a challenge for that, we found from our research, is that if you're working with installers and trying to encourage them to suggest retrofit, they can be quite worried that if they suggest retrofit measures, that makes their quote sound very uncompetitive. So it's a case of working with the installers, trying to find ways to, as you say, pretty much sell it, but as you're saying, you're not selling something that people don't want. Although you did make me laugh when you said a dodgy double glazing. I think the first job I ever had after leaving school was selling dodgy double glazing. I was appalling at it. So yeah, understand how to piggyback on other life changes. Other examples might be changes to work patterns, changes to family circumstances. These life transitions are the best time to make behavioural changes. So, summary for my 5 minutes: use behavioural science. It's evidence-based, it's effective. Understand your customers, the benefits they value, and how to tell them about them in a way that they trust. Make it easy for them and piggyback on other life changes when you can. Okay, thank you.
Hello everybody. Can everyone hear me? Cool, awesome. Okay, so my name's Kate Charrington. I'm a chartered residential surveyor, historically a valuer as well, and currently I'm the director of Projekt 3, which essentially supports independent residential surveyors to deliver more comprehensive and meaningful surveys through the use of commenting on things like sustainability and also by implementing high standards. Today I'm actually going to talk about engaging residents through retrofit from a pre-purchase home survey perspective. So actually just out of interest, how many of us here are lucky enough to have bought their own property? Can I have a show of hands please? Okay, and how many of you have bought a survey or had a survey done? Okay, so not necessarily all for all, but essentially I want you to, for those of you who have actually had a survey undertaken, I want you to just kind of cast your mind back and think about what that survey actually delivered to you. So as it stands, home surveys effectively reflect the past and the present. So surveys are there to talk about things like defects, so what has occurred or what is actually occurring, particularly now. So we tend to look at different elements of the property and condition of the actual elements of property as well. And we ultimately are looking out for primarily big issues, so structural movement, dampness, roof defects, those kinds of things that could impact a consumer or a purchaser of property heavily in terms of finances. What surveys also actually do, and kind of relatively recently is actually talk about things like energy matters. So where we have different levels of survey, so we'll talk about the ratings that we actually find on an EPC, an energy performance certificate. At the higher kind of survey level, we'll actually talk about discrepancies. So specifically, if we actually see something on an EPC that doesn't quite tally with what we've actually found on inspection. And then at the highest kind of building survey level 3 type level, we'll actually talk about the suitability of any recommendations that have actually been noted in the EPC itself. So something that we kind of really want to think about from a surveying perspective is how we actually navigate those issues and defects around delivering better information and better advice to clients. And home surveys deliver a huge opportunity for us to actually introduce the concept and idea of retrofit into the minds of a customer before they've actually gone into the property, before they've actually purchased it. So currently, home surveys, bearing in mind that I do a lot of actual kind of audit and vetting work of surveys, they don't use the words retrofit. They don't necessarily talk about heat loss. And there's a kind of wide discrepancy there and a missed opportunity for us to tell people about the benefits that retrofitting a property might have on top of, you know, the kind of more generic enhancements. So your addition of kitchens, new bathrooms, new extensions, that kind of thing. So because the survey is based on past and present, that kind of somewhat kind of limits our scope of comment, and it's my kind of view and my opinion that we should actually be looking more at future-proofing our properties by future-proofing our surveys as well. So very much kind of bringing in more information into surveys themselves, talking about things like retrofit, like heat loss, like PAS 2035, talking about things like MCS, what that actually means. So it really makes sense that if we are already talking about energy matters, if we are profiling the causes of damp, we need to actually be talking about retrofit as well. And we need to do that through language, signposting, using particular terminology. You mentioned about trust. I hope, being one myself, I hope that surveyors are trustworthy enough to actually pay them to help you actually make the right decision when you're actually purchasing a property. So if we think about defects as a general, if there's a defect in a roof, if there's a defect in a wall, typically speaking, there will be an element of heat loss. If there is an element of heat loss, there will be a requirement for enhanced energy demand. If there's a bigger requirement for energy demand, there will be essentially a financial burden upon that occupant to actually pay out more to actually utilise their home. So for me, home surveys are a huge opportunity to use particular terminology, particular language, talking about retrofit at a very basic level before a purchaser actually moves into a property. And if we can do that, if we can marry defects in fabric with actually talking about how retrofit will benefit the customer from an environmental perspective, from a health perspective, then surely that makes sense. And if we can do that, then ultimately I think surveys will be doing a much better job in the long run. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think you'll agree they're three really thought-provoking presentations. So it's audience participation time. We've got somebody with a roving mic going round. Question here first, and then the gentleman in the front second.
Hi, thank you. John Milner from Bailey Garner. Do you think, just as a panel, we've got a problem about terminology? Because it was really interesting to hear you, Kate, talk about retrofit and those sorts of things, but retrofit as a term is kind of looking backwards. It seems quite technical, and maybe warmer homes or more sustainable homes or comfy homes. Does the panel have a view on the language that we're using to try and communicate with people from a technical perspective to people that are perhaps non-technically minded? Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone want to go at that one first?
Thanks for that, John. We have recognised that. So we work with Bailey Garner, and so we've called it Retrofit. We've called it SHDF for 18 months. Going forwards, we refer to it as a Sustainable Homes Programme because we recognise that people don't understand what retrofit is, or retrofit means different things to different people. So we have started to use a different language again to try and help bring people along that journey. But so from our experience, yes, you do need to try and, I don't know if normalise is the right answer, but yes, we have definitely changed the way that we refer to it both internally and externally, because it's not just customers in their homes, but also our own individual staff that need to understand what it is that we're doing. But I don't know if anyone else has a different view.
Yeah, hi. So I think I can only obviously take this from a survey perspective, and what you say absolutely is true. And I think that's probably been a significant hurdle for people, kind of outside of the scope of a survey, but actually just making things more accessible to people. So, you know, when we talk about structural movement subsidence, what does that actually mean? I know that kind of sits outside of retrofit, but it's the same principle. It's taking those concepts and actually translating it into language that actually means something to people. So I always kind of talk to surveyors and people who I actually teach around, you know, the concept of a tea cosy. Effectively, you're trying to insulate and keep that teapot warm, right? So I think very much from a survey perspective, it's not just actually what we put down in the report, it's actually how we talk to the client after it as well. And I think that's fundamentally something that we have to keep doing. We can't rely on a kind of written report, actually, particularly from what you were saying regarding visuals, to kind of relay information regarding retrofit.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the most scary term I've ever heard is deep retrofit. Well, there's a term never to get through somebody's front door, isn't it? So, gentleman at the front, I think, was next, and then there's a gentleman at the back.
Hello, is that working? Yeah. My name's Bill. I'm a tenants rep from a medium-sized housing association in Newham. Can I say that's the best workshop I've been to in 2 days? I thought it was brilliant. In terms of, they're just about to embark on a major decarbonisation energy efficiency programme. The issue I wanted to discuss primarily was what happens when you've got a rather untypical tenant base. So they have a percentage of the properties are for key workers, most of whom are young and most of whom are transient, coming to London, first job, kick out in the evenings, you know. Difficult to motivate in terms of a long-term future for the property. The majority are used by Newham Council to discharge their homelessness families, who have got perhaps a whole range of other issues where the property itself is just, you know, in fact, the standards are very good generally. So trying to get people involved in the first place is very, very difficult, and I wondered if anyone had any ideas about that. And just to add that, you know, it's one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and I'm not even sure myself just how much difference it makes, but it's an extremely diverse area, and so there's all sorts of different cultures that can be involved with all of this stuff. And whether it's not just about terminology, you know, whether that's another thing that might need some attention.
Thank you for that question. I don't know if anyone wants to take a first stab at it. I guess the big challenge is this is totally tenure blind. Every household in the UK at some point is probably going to be a customer of this process. So we have got to find ways of communicating and engaging with everyone on whatever is their platform and whatever is their approach. I don't know whether if there's a behaviour angle, or maybe Paul, from your experiences at Clarion.
I suppose it's again what we've kind of recognised is that for going through the retrofit process, using that terminology, is that every home is different, and actually that's created an internal vision around a plan for every home, which is what we now have to. We're now in the process of putting into place. But I think it's, if you take the key worker as an example, and I think we touched on it there, it's about what is in it for them. Everyone's got a different selling point, what's therein. Now, if they're not there all the time, or if theirs is about saving money, then maybe it is about the billing side of it. But actually, if they're young professionals, maybe the climate change and that social responsibility is the sell. So I think it's about, again, understanding those different clients and client bases, and then working out what is the sell to them. And I think that then gives you the in and gets them on the hook. And once you've got somebody, I think you can then talk them through that journey as you go forward, but it is identifying those individuals, what's in it for them, and then I think you've got a real opportunity to take it forwards.
Yeah, agree that what's really important is finding out individual values of people and what's going to matter to them. Also important is making this a normal topic of conversation. It's something that is going to affect everybody. It is at the moment. It's going to become increasingly important. So, and touching on the last question as well, finding ways of making it a normal, everyday conversation point. So we've got to use normal language for that. But also, particularly for key workers, they are going to be finding more and more of this in their workplace as well, particularly for health and social care workers. The big message that's going to be coming through is that we need to tackle carbon, reach net zero in order to protect the people that we're working with. And so there's going to become more and more moral norms to make these changes too. So, Bill, thanks for the question. Hang on in there and keep plugging it, and it will become normal, and we will start seeing change.
Just a really quick comment from me, actually, is that, I mean, you mentioned different cultures, and that's why I personally think it's so important that we have retrofit advisors, retrofit assessors, retrofit coordinators who actually talk a different language. Otherwise, if we can't talk a language to somebody, we can't actually get them engaged in the first place.
Gentleman at the back.
Yeah, I think our home is our biggest asset, and I think people are very sensitive to loss, and I was wondering maybe Fiona could comment on this. I think if we buy a salad spinner on Amazon, we're able to review it and give it stars. You can have an online review for most things you buy. Should we be doing online reviews for retrofit activity?
Okay, an interesting point you picked up on there. It's called intertemporal choice. The idea that we treat immediate certain losses, we give them a lot more weight than potential future gains. And isn't this exactly the problem we're facing for retrofit? You're asking people to fork out for cash now with the promise that in the future, in 10, 20, 30 years' time, they will recoup their money and more. So yes, good point. And is it important that we rate people and give them stars? Well, when trust is this important, then yeah, it's a very good point. It's really important that if we're being asked to pay for retrofit ourselves, and this is not small amounts of money we're talking about, it is essential that we feel reassured. There's also a psychological challenge here where it's much easier. If there's something we're uncertain about, if there's a risky decision we're faced with, the less risky option is we don't do anything. And so by creating more trust, we're removing the likelihood or reducing the likelihood that people will do nothing.
Gentleman down there, thank you.
Thank you. David from Trustmark. Paul, you mentioned about sort of effectively abandoning the word retrofit. I might be exaggerating.
I don't think I used the word abandoning. Look at the stage I'm on.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's just exacerbating the problem of retrofit not being understood, which is sort of a really core problem still. There's plenty of data to show that. Does the panel think that retrofit could become as famous and understood as recycling? And if not, why not?
There's better people qualified here, but it has to. I mean, we've just talked, I think the word normalised is the word. It has to become what we do. It has to be talked about in that way. So, yeah, from my perspective, everything we're working towards now is making this business as usual and just normalising it. But, as I say, I will pass on to people who are far more qualified to talk about this than me.
I'm going to try this, right? I think, look, I'm just going to say it, like policy, legislation, they effectively kind of force people to do things. I mean, I remember when we had like plastic bags and, that was the norm. Nowadays, it's not. You see everyone and sundry with their kind of reusable bag. In terms of whether it can be kind of as big as that, I think absolutely it can. And from my kind of professional background, I think that's why, talking to people about retrofit before they move in, that is fundamental, because then you've actually already sown the seed. You've actually kind of delivered what they need in terms of information and signposted them to actually then undertake the process. I hope that we can get there, and I know that we can. We've got a fantastic set of people in the industry to actually do that. It's just, I personally think it will be driven both top down and bottom up as well. So just finding the right mechanisms to actually implement it across the supply chains.
Gentleman over there. I mean, I guess the gentleman over there first, and then the lady. I guess I think everybody's got a different trigger into this, haven't they? And is it a case of making the people fit the language, or the language fit the people? I guess that's probably a deeper conversation than I'm capable of. Sorry.
Simon Pardo. I just wanted to chip in on that. I think the key difference between recycling and retrofit is the ing. It needs to be a process. Keep saying retrofitting because that makes sense. On your point about the surveys. Yes, I can see that surveys are a moment to get people to think about retrofitting, but isn't the bigger challenge for surveys that this whole country is obsessed with doing up and selling houses, not just on the telly, but in real life too, and that a house that's done up to sell is the opposite of effective retrofit, because all the nightmares won't emerge for the next, for months or years. So we all have had surveys that failed to notice key things. I mean, what about the challenge? How is that happening? The challenge for surveyors of picking up whether retrofitting has been done properly?
Yeah, great question. But I think kind of coming to the crux of your question, are you kind of saying that it's basically talking about retrofitting relating to value, right? Because currently we don't value energy efficiency. Coming back to what Fiona was saying, we don't always think about the kind of long-term benefits. And if we don't see long-term benefits, why would that be valuable to us financially? So I think from a surveying perspective, you're absolutely right. First and foremost, what we actually need are surveyors who can identify what has been retrofitted. Has it been retrofitted well? Is there certification and installation kind of requirements that have been adhered to and done properly? There's a number of I probably sound like I'm being critical and cynical here, but there's a lot of surveyors who may not know what MCS actually is, what PAS 2035 actually is. So it's that kind of educational piece for people who are, really well qualified in what they do. They understand building pathology, they understand building physics, building fabric, but it's actually kind of utilising that to better advise consumers of property what they can do that is not necessarily just superficially beneficial, but is actually going to reduce their outgoings, kind of help them avoid things like fuel poverty and all the rest in between, on top of retaining value as much as it is enhancing value. Hopefully that answers.
Thank you. I think it was a lady in the middle there. There we go. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to stand up because I'm really small. Hi, I'm Saskia. Thank you. That was really interesting. I'm a PhD student. I'm studying social housing retrofit, especially from the perspective of bringing the tenants on board really early on. But I'm actually going to jump on this semantics conversation that's going on. Because I think language is really important. I've actually been defining retrofit for the last year in terms of the triple bottom line. So looking at social retrofit, retrofit from an environmental perspective, retrofit from an economic perspective, and trying to broaden the concept of retrofit, so we're not just thinking of it from a really technical, environmental performance standpoint. And I think it's important that we look at the words that we already have that's already entering public governmental policy discourse and try to define and explore and explain and cover all bases and all angles of the word and what that can mean for the people who are involved in the processes, the people who are involved in the outcomes. It's more a comment than a question. I guess I'd like your opinion on it. But I don't necessarily think we should be looking at, yes, simplifying language to explain things, definitely. Removing the word retrofit rather than expanding on the word retrofit, I don't know if I agree. Any comment?
Anyone? Any comments, observations?
So as we talked about earlier, obviously we changed the name of ours to see what would happen. I mean, that was based on what came from our customers and the engagement we have and the feedback. I think it all comes back to there is no one solution fits all. So the triple bottom line again, that's part of our sort of wider asset strategy where we've looked at that. There are elements that fit this work. There are elements that don't naturally come into it, and then it's trying to find a home for those things. And I think that's the bit we're still wrestling with. So yeah, retrofitting, sustainable homes, call it what we will. It's I think that's kind of to some extent. It doesn't matter. It's whatever matters to that person, and it comes back to what we've talked about here again. It's all about individuals. The house is individual. The person's individual. You have to work in balance between what you can do to the home and how you can work with the customer that's in it. And that all goes back to the survey, and you're in the trust in that person that goes in there. They're that point of contact. You're relying on their expertise to work that customer through that journey in that home. And there's no amount of clever language or whatever we do that will make that easier. It's about just normalising everything to everyone's on the same page, whatever that page might be.
And what an interesting topic. We've also been looking at the community benefits of retrofit as well. So not just the individual person, but what does it mean to a whole area? For instance, greater pride in your neighbourhood, feeling that it's safer, there's less crime going on, it's a more attractive place to live. But yeah, lovely. Perhaps you'd come and give a seminar at some point.
Alex Thomas from Worcester Bosch. I just wondered if there is a missed opportunity with hybrid heat pump technology. Specifically, we're getting a lot of inquiries of where boilers are beyond economical repair and they just don't have the time, especially in temperatures like today, to replace a heating system immediately, i.e. the next day, whereas heat pump design might take 3 weeks to 6 weeks for that. And I wonder whether there is any sort of thoughts in regard to, maybe it's a central government issue, looking at funding, stepping halfway, or at least assisting homeowners, residents, social housing to get on to that level up, climbing up the EPC levels and giving a little bit of stepping stone to that level. Specifically, a lot of residents would love to maybe go the heat pump route, but this could potentially be a really good stepping stone, or maybe to enforce to use another different fuel type, such as obviously electricity, and then also having better negotiation power with your energy providers, having a little bit of gas in the winter, utilising that at lower price and utilising the heat pump or dynamic tariffing or whichever way. I just want to get your comments really on hybrid technology and where you see that, and maybe the government might put that into the 600,000 heat pumps target for years 2028, but I know that's a controversial statement.
I'm going to throw that question at the audience. Who thinks, forget tenure, because tenure is not important because every house has got to go through it. Who thinks that this should be at least partially funded by the government, or us really? Socialised, should we say socialised cost? That's quite a lot. Who's got a very contra view to that? So it should all be down to the household or the landlord. Well, that's pretty compelling argument there, Alex. That seems to be your response. We should all be going knocking on the door of our MP saying, it's time you got serious about this and put some money into it to make a real change. gentleman down here had a question.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? Just, I think, and I'm just talking from a surveying perspective here, so apologies, guys, but it's really interesting, this kind of concept of heat pumps and how surveyors in particular can advise that is the best thing to do when, I mean, last week I was speaking to a surveyor who spoke to a client who'd had a heat pump installed and they were actually getting £400 bills every single month. I don't know why that is. I don't know the exact circumstance of that, but it's very hard to make it so kind of accessible to people when there are these horror stories. So really kind of making sure that we have data and the information is really, really important. So, yeah.
Hi, I was wondering if any of the panellists might be more on the behaviour change side, but other people might have a view about whether there's any good examples or there's opportunities around gamification for retrofit. I was seeing a speaker earlier on the main stage talk about this with examples like the saving sessions from all of the major energy providers and how that has become almost a game, kind of becoming a game for communities and residents. Are there any ways we could apply that thinking to retrofit the problem as well?
Yeah, gamification, tried and tested method, definitely. It works the best when it is a long-term behaviour change that you're trying to implement. It's a way of keeping people engaged. Whereas retrofit, perhaps it's something that it's a major thing that you do once and then maybe you maintain it later. But definitely getting the community involved in the long-term aspect of it would be the proportion of people who had done this. So yeah, it's a sweet idea.
I think this gentleman down here and then a gentleman next to you, and that's probably going to do us for questions.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, actually, I know that it's the retrofit. The word is still complicated when it comes to convincing people and trying to normalize that. But unfortunately, there are new terms showing up like circularity and circular economy. But I throughout the whole seminars I took part, nobody talks about that. But the circularity and circular economy will become one of the mainstreams after, I think, 2030, because energy efficiency hopefully will improve. And then again, the net zero requires that the buildings have a low impact, means that we have a low carbon footprint for the building materials as well. So when we are performing retrofits, we are having options to go for different type of material. So is there any decision to include that, to normalize that circular economy behavior and circularity of materials, and encouraging people when they are asking for retrofit? So you have already convinced them, you have normalized the term retrofit, but the next step is to make sure what they are going for is the most sustainable, because then it helps the developers and investors in those technologies to grow and cut the cost as well, which obviously benefit the net zero target that we have.
I think we'd absolutely love it if people were asking for sustainable products or talking about circular economies and things like that. It's not probably in a personal space. It's not the conversations we're currently having with customers. It's more about trying to really get through the front door and make that difference. Gentleman in the back, and I think that's our last question. Thank you.
Last but hopefully not least, I'm Tristan. I'm Technical Director of the Institute of Specialist Surveyors and Engineers. So if you want to talk building pathology, please come to us. Saskia, just to pick up on your comment there about these different sorts of meanings associated with the retrofit, alarmingly possibly, health wasn't even part of that. I think ultimately, whether you're into sustainability, energy, all of this great stuff, actually, can we just think in terms of buildings fit for living?
Yeah. So that's what I actually said. Like, if we think about property and people together,
yeah, it is.
I mean, that just makes sense. It's all very well kind of giving a survey to somebody and talking to them about fabric, but actually we should be going beyond. My personal view is that we should be going beyond that. We should actually be saying, do you know what? If there's damp here, then that could lead to maybe perhaps lower indoor air quality, particularly if you've got respiratory conditions. We should really be very much focusing on clients as individuals rather than just, delivering a survey to just some person. I think we need to talk more to our clients, see what their requirements and their needs actually are from a health perspective. That's not to say that we need to be asking them to give us their medical history, but actually just being better informed about their requirements.
Yeah, and indeed, just because I think we've run out of time, but there is also the home improvements by prescription pilots going on where doctors are able to prescribe measures to improve the damp and mold situation in people's homes because of health-related issues. I think we're going to have to close off there. So my big takeaway is trust. This is about building trust in communities, trust with individuals, and trust across the country. So I'm sure you'll join me in thanking our 3 fantastic speakers for a great session. Thank you. And thank you for your great questions.